What is your assessment of Governor Walz's position vis-a-vis his military service?
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. And look, I don't think it should be all that sensitive. It should be pretty straightforward. But in this case, we have a elected official that has repeatedly and set a pattern. Excuse me, Hugh. We've got single dad duty here.
That's
Who
okay.
has
We
set
love single dad duty. It's okay.
This is Army.
Hello there. Good morning,
Say hi,
Army.
Army. Morning. Well, look, it's pretty straightforward. He has repeatedly described himself as a retired command sergeant major. He absolutely was not. That would be like me describing myself as a retired general when I, in fact, retired as a colonel. So that's one piece. But the other piece is a little more complicated in that he infers, he insinuates, he lets people believe that he was a veteran of Afghanistan and Iraq in different occasions, and he clearly wasn't. And you just take his speech at the 20th anniversary of 9/11 as a case in point. He's talking to a group of Gold Star families. He talks about when he returned from overseas, he talks about being a, one second, buddy, when he talks about being a veteran of OEF. And, uh, and then uh, he says, you know, when I was standing at Bagram Air Base and I saw the flag draped coffins, any reasonable person would assume he was there in his military capacity. And in fact, he had visited years later as a member of Congress. So it's this constant insinuation. It's a little bit nuanced, but he clearly let people believe that he was a combat veteran. And what's so frustrating to me, the media conflates the issue of his service versus exaggerating his service. Everybody
Now, you know what's
celebrates
so
his
interesting
service,
about
but it's the
Army
lying about
showing
it
up.
that's the problem.
What's very interesting about Army crashing our interview is that you've got a toddler, and it's very hard for a young dad like Michael Walz was at the time to go to Italy for a year and leave his wife to deal with two children, two daughters. I get that. I've had kids deploy, and it's not easy on anyone when they deploy. It's a lot harder when they deploy in harm's way, but it's not easy when they deploy. What Mary Catherine Ham said yesterday on the Ruthless podcast is that he intends to leave false impression and that it's a purposeful pattern. Is that a fair assessment that there is a pattern of purposeful deception here?
That is a much more eloquent way of saying it. Thank you, Mary Catherine Ham, than I was just trying to do. It's insinuating and it is leaving that false impression. So, case in point, he very rarely ever, I haven't seen anywhere publicly where he says Italy. He just says, when I got back, when I was overseas, my fellow veterans, and in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, which most people assume was Afghanistan. And that leads people to believe that he did more than he did. Nothing against what he did, but don't exaggerate your record and don't lie about it. And he's clearly lying about his rank.
Until 2 nights ago, I had never heard the term gun decking. But I went over to dinner with my brother-in-law who lives up here, retired Lieutenant Colonel Marine Corps lifer, right? Annapolis, Marine Corps. And he didn't know the facts of the Walz case. He said, did the guy gun deck? And I said, what is gun decking? And he said, that's when you add to your military resume. And I said, well, that's a new term for me. And he says it matters to veterans. Now, there are 800,000 veterans in Pennsylvania, 500,000 in Michigan, 250,000 in Wisconsin. Does it matter in the veteran community, Congressman Walz?
Heck yeah, it matters. It should matter. It should matter to everyone, but it absolutely matters to the veterans community. Look, if you served in the National Guard and you never deployed to a combat zone, good on you. Fine by me. If you were a master sergeant and you didn't complete what you needed to complete to be a command sergeant major, say you're a retired master sergeant. Everybody gives you two thumbs up for stepping up to serve. Uh, but don't gun deck. That's a new, I guess that's a Navy term. Uh, and don't exaggerate. But I do think there's one more issue, Hugh, in terms of he knew that his unit was about to deploy to Iraq. Uh, it's one thing if you're a line soldier and you've got family problems, or I've let, for compassionate reasons, some of my Green Berets not deploy if they had an issue. But when you're the commander and you're the command sergeant major, you've got real. You have to go. Uh, that's it. I mean, you are. He was
Can
in
you
charge of
expand
the
on that,
training of the
Congressman?
personnel. Yeah.
Can you expand on what a command sergeant major does and is, as opposed to a sergeant in the unit or a master sergeant? And by the way, I always get these ranks wrong when I do my annual Semper Fi Fund shows on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. And I always screw it up because there are many, many different ranks and civilians don't get
Yeah.
it. And I'm guilty. What is a command sergeant major and why does that matter so much?
You're the top enlisted non-commissioned officer in the unit. You're responsible for the training, for the personnel, for the logistics. You're responsible to get your unit ready to go fight. It is like being in charge of all the practices for an NFL team and then saying, I'm not going to get on the plane when they go to the Super Bowl. It really is leaving your unit high and dry. He absolutely knew. Some people are trying to mince words when they got the orders, when they didn't. His replacement said he knew, and his commanding officer said he knew, and he made a conscious decision not to go for political reasons.
Well, that brings me to my last question on this, and I want to turn to you're going out with JD Vance on the road tomorrow. I want to talk about that. But notice of deployment. It has been my experience with my family members in the military that they know a long time before they go anywhere where they're going, that the military plots out careers, they plot out rotations. They just don't decide to send the Minnesota National Guard 2 months earlier. They give people a lot. I mean, formal notice versus the buzz is different. Explain that to people.
Yeah,
Your career military.
That's absolutely right. You're given a warning. I've never seen it less than a year in advance because every one of those National Guard soldiers have employers who have their civilian jobs, and you have to give them opportunity to backfill, to compensate for the people that they're about to lose to go overseas. But it's also about getting the ammunition in place, getting the training ranges in place. The difference with the National Guard and Reserves and the active duty's training week in and week out. You have to get kind of ramped up and ready, and you don't do that in 30, 60 days. It takes the better part of a year.
I have one last observation for you to comment on. It would be very easy for Congressman, then Governor Walz, to produce a bit of audio or videotape where he says, let me be clear. I did not serve in Iraq or Afghanistan. I never heard a shot fired in anger. I'm proud of my service, but I was not in a combat zone. I can't tell you how many times I've heard veterans tell me that, Congressman. I don't know if that's your experience. Veterans are usually very careful about what they don't want to be accused of stolen valor. It's like you don't ever even want to get close to that. Do you think that tape exists? And if it exists, would we have already seen it?
I don't think it exists, and I don't think the reason he's saying it in the way you just said it is because it would contradict now over a decade of other public appearances where he did insinuate, where he did leave it open to assumption that he went to combat. And he clearly said he was a retired command sergeant major. So I just think he's backed himself into a corner here, and the veterans community, despite the kind of the media uproar about it or their defensiveness about it, is going to continue to call him out. And at some point, he's going to have to come clean.
No, let's turn to JD Vance. Where are you going with JD tomorrow?
Just outside of Philadelphia, I'll be there with Congressman Brian Mast, also a combat veteran who lost both his legs in Afghanistan, and Congressman, soon-to-be Senator Jim Banks, also a combat veteran, and we're going to talk about this very issue.
Oh, that is true. You know, Senator Vance has done a wonderful job on the Sunday shows. He took a lot of incoming, and they didn't knock him backwards at all. I mean, he's hitting his stride. So please tell him for me, get back on the Hewitt show. You got to work harder. You got to get up earlier. But everything is about Pennsylvania. Is it? Are you going to Pennsylvania because the Trump campaign asked you to go to Pennsylvania?
Well, I assume that's the case. I'm going because I was asked to go, and I'm proud to do it. But Hugh, to your point, isn't it amazing that JD Vance is getting grilled about Walz's record, and the media is not asking Walz himself? He's made one comment up in a scripted environment up on stage. So, sit down, Governor Walz, and get asked the tough questions and explain yourself, explain all of these discrepancies. And we haven't even talked about Harris and her 180 on the border and 180 on taxes on tips and everything else she's trying to do to completely reinvent herself and pull the wool over the American people's eyes.
Let's close with a question on the border, Congressman. Today in Axios, it is reported that she is going to repudiate her anti-fracking position and her border on her position on decriminalizing crossing the border. I don't believe her. I just don't believe her for a moment. Do you think anyone does?
She's a complete fake. But if you haven't been paying attention, the last 4 years, right? If you weren't paying attention to the 2020 primaries when she raised her hand and said she would provide free health care for anybody crossing our border, then, I'm a little concerned that some people are just going to buy into this new fake Kamala, this new completely made over, media remake. I mean, Time Magazine put her on the cover and she wouldn't even sit down for an interview. They put her on the cover anyway. I mean, this is Soviet style propaganda coming out of the mainstream media right now, because rather than being some type of objective journalistic body, they've decided their entire mantra is to prevent Trump from being in the White House again, no matter what it takes.
Yeah, in the last 24 days, we've learned more about legacy media than we have about Kamala Harris, and it's never going to change. People aren't going to forget that.